Welcome from the Center for the History of Women Philosophers and Scientists here at Paderborn University. I'm pleased to present our research on the genesis of the Institution de Physique, written by Émilie du Châtelet between the years 1737 and 1740. Émilie du Châtelet is praised as an excellent representative of the age of European Enlightenment. Born in 1706, she immersed herself in philosophy and became one of the prominent voices in the debate between Leibniz and Newton. In her Institution de Physique, she presented her new ideas and her critique of the previous philosophical method. This book is one of the great works in the history of philosophy because of the considerable influence it had on the further course of philosophy. This project of the transcription of the Paris Manuscript is a follow-up project. In 2020, we were able to present our historical critical edition of du Châtelet manuscripts preserved at the Russian National Library in St. Petersburg. It is precisely this development from the earlier manuscripts up to the becoming of the Institution de Physique that we retrace in our projects. Although the Institution de Physique have an impressive reception history, a historical critical edition of this text was until now still missing. This is all the more remarkable as the French National Library preserves a manuscript that sheds light on how the Institution developed. First, let me introduce to you our working group. This is Hans-Peter Neumann, Gilles Muller, Aaron Wells, Henning Freiberg, and myself. Hans-Peter Neumann is a well-known scholar in the philosophy of Leibniz and Wolff, and worked in different institutions, such as the Berlin Freie Universität, at the Interdisciplinary Center for the Research of the European Enlightenment, and in cooperation with the Saxonian Academy of Sciences. He is also an experienced editor who edited the correspondence between Christian Wolff and Count Ernst Christoph von Manteuffel.
Thank you, Ruth, for the introduction. Well, to answer your question, to me, the complexity of the manuscript was quite surprising. There are so many revision stages, or let's say textual layers to uncover, that the reconstruction of the text is pretty challenging. Actually, many parts of the text were changed or restructured so extensively that we may say that we have very different texts in front of us. So the main challenge was how to make those different textual layers visible to the reader. It was crucial to make explicit the main stages of revision in structure and content made by du Châtelet. So this is the reason why we decided to do this by establishing these main stages as textual versions on their own, rather than placing them in the variant apparatus. We still provide a variant apparatus, though, representing the more finer-grained revision stages. To give an example, we have two drafts of the avant-propos in the Paris Manuscript. What we could do was to uncover 5 revision stages of the first draft and 5 of the second one. Of those 10 revision stages, we established 4 distinct, fully edited textual versions, while the other 6 revision stages are represented in the variant apparatus. Otherwise, the variant apparatus would become completely overloaded, especially regarding the changes in structure that we see so often in the manuscript. Also, presenting the edition online would have become, in my opinion, way too difficult. After all, our purpose is to present a reader and user-friendly digital online edition which is now as a work in progress well on the way, if I may say so. Well, in order to really see the implications of the process from the manuscript to the printed edition, in order to gain insight into the transformation that took place, we need to take every revision stage, every version seriously. All the more as there are striking, truly striking, substantial differences between the versions, as well as between the manuscript and the prints. This is the reason why we want to make it possible for the readers to see on their own how the texts evolved, to make it possible for them to draw their own conclusions by comparing the different handwritten and printed versions that we as editors provide. And this is also the reason why we speak of the genesis of the institution from the manuscript to the printed edition.
Henning Freiberg is a technical assistant in this project. Before he came to our project, Henning worked on game development, but then joined in already to give technical support in our St. Petersburg edition of Du Châtelet's manuscript.
Firstly, both projects use the same standard for presenting digital text, which is TEI, an extension to XML. For the St. Petersburg edition, we worked with XML from the beginning. The editors were writing it by hand with the help of an editor. While this was very good for the editors to understand what possibilities TEI allows to flex the characteristics of a text, it had also some drawbacks, such as slow-to-write text in XML, which then also have been hard to proofread. Therefore, Hans-Peter Neumann proposed a text editor for the work of writing text, which is originally meant for print media. Luckily for us, this editor could export the text to TEI. This way, we had a basis text we could extend upon. Yet the exported files had a different dialect than our previous projects used. Adapting to this has been the main challenge in the beginning. On the other hand, the previous project had the philosophy of presenting the text in a plain and easy-to-read manner. In retrospective, we want to allow the readers more flexibility how to read the text, while also allowing the text versions to be compared on the same screen. Therefore, we will focus on making the project viewable on smaller resolutions, which then means you can view multiple text or versions next to each other. We also want to present the user various tools to optionally highlight certain parts of the document or jump inside of the document.
Jill Miller joined us in September 2021. She completed her PhD on Montaigne and Descartes. Her main research focuses on the history of early modern philosophy, especially French and German philosophy. Her research project is concerned with the moral philosophy of French women from the 16th to the 18th century beside Du Châtelet, such as Marie de Gournay, Gabrielle Suchon, and Sophie Germain.
I am mainly concerned with the elaboration of a more reader-friendly modern French version of the Institution de Physique. That is, I modify the spelling of some words and introduce some punctuation marks to render the sentences more easily readable. Furthermore, I proofread the already transcribed chapters by comparing our transcription to the manuscript and to the printed versions. Sometimes there are little spelling mistakes or different possible reading options, which we then discuss in our team. Finally, I look after the webpage and I regularly post news about this project, and I'm even working on a new organization of the bibliography of Du Châtelet's primary literature. The main difficulty is the handwritten manuscript by Du Châtelet because of the numerous revision stages and to introduce corrections and restructurings of the text. Du Châtelet worked a lot with signs and symbols to indicate the paragraphs where the text continues when she did the restructurings. So when I proofread the transcription, I have to jump from one page to another in the manuscript, which is not always easy. Besides, there are the choices of reading done by my colleagues when the text does not clearly indicate how or where the text continues. So I have to deal with Du Châtelet's choices and even with the choices of my colleagues. For the modern French version, there is a different difficulty. I have to weigh up how many changes are enough to make the text understandable without changing or charging it too much. I want to remain as faithful as possible to the original text. Additionally, the sentence structure is not always understandable, even for a person who speaks and reads French. I think this is because Du Châtelet wrote some sentences while she was thinking about the next steps or even about later corrections. In such cases, you can find sentences that break off in the middle or that continue very strangely, as if they had no connections to the beginning of the sentence. I started working on this project in September 2021 with the proofreading of the avant-propos. First, I had to get used to the different work tools and learn to understand the approach of my colleagues. At the end of October, I was able to start the modern French version, and at that moment, I have finished the modern French version of the avant-propos. The proofreading of Chapter 1 and 2 is finished as well, and I am now working on Chapter 3. For Chapter 2, our team will have to discuss the different versions and variants, because it is one of those chapters where Du Châtelet did not only a lot of the corrections in the manuscript, but also even later amending the first printed version in the second edition of 1742. Some new paragraphs are added in the manuscript and in the printed version, which are not the same. Others are reorganized or completely deleted. It is a really thrilling and exciting work.
Aaron Wells came to the project in March 2021. He joined us from Notre Dame, where he worked with Catherine Brading on an English translation of Du Châtelet's Institutions. His recent Du Châtelet research papers have been published in Philosophy of Science and the Southern Journal of Philosophy. He also works on Kant.
We are currently at work on transcribing the 16th of the 21 chapters of the manuscript of the Institutions and getting near done with that. So I anticipate that preliminary transcriptions of the complete work will be ready by late spring of 2022. And much more work will still need to be done on the commentary, though we have been tabulating various correlations between passages in the manuscript and also tracking down sources or explanations for particularly challenging references. On the one hand, there are fairly clear evolutions in Du Châtelet's thought from the manuscript to the printed version. For example, she's much closer to atomism in the manuscript, and as is relatively well known, she's also much closer to an orthodox Newtonian position. On the other hand, something that challenged my expectations somewhat is the way in which the manuscript includes a lot of material that is not in the final version, but also does not seem to conflict with the final version. Sometimes the material she leaves out is more bold or speculative than what is kept in. But at other points, it's hard to tell exactly why changes were made. In some cases, perhaps just for reasons of brevity. And what this suggests is that with appropriate caution, we can use the manuscript to get some insight into topics that Du Châtelet only discusses briefly in the published work. Something I've worked on in particular is a discussion of the metaphysics and epistemology of quantity that appears early in the manuscript and has no correlate in the published work. Depending on how we think about the status of this passage, it could shed light on the account of mathematics in the published version of the work, which is one of the research topics I work on. We've just now been getting into transcribing the later chapters on Newtonian gravitation. Chapter 16, which I'm currently working on, is pivotal, and it's the chapter from this manuscript that has received the most scholarly attention in the past, though usually focused on just one or two sentences. So it's very gratifying to be able to compare now the full transcription of this chapter to the published version. So one interpretive difficulty is the highly mathematical style of many of the chapters. They're rendered in geometrical and proportional terms that tend to be unfamiliar to us. And also, even though the work is officially pitched to a beginner, Du Châtelet is actually often summarizing results from the scientific literature that are not elementary, and this presupposes a lot of background which we don't always have.
The reconstruction of Du Châtelet's manuscripts is of invaluable significance for the history of women philosophers and scientists, for the history of the early 18th century European Enlightenment, and for Du Châtelet's own intellectual career. Du Châtelet distanced herself early on from the Cartesians, from Leibniz and Newton, and realized her own ideas that go straight to Kant and other famous intellectuals of the time. I'm grateful to my colleagues for joining me.